Good morning, everyone. There's no pressure with that introduction there, full name and everything. As Matt's mentioned, we are currently doing a series about the crowd that's being discussed in the life groups, and I'm just putting it out there. Our life group's the best. I'm just putting it out there. But to be fair, no one's mentioned it as of yet, so I'm just putting it out there. Ours is the best. And if anyone wants to join, Wednesday night, 7:30, 8 Southside Road, you know where it is. So what we're doing is, like I said, we discussed the crowd and we've looked at different times where people have gathered. And crowds meet for different reasons. In our day-to-day life, crowds meet for worship events, concerts, sports events, whatever it is. There's different things are happening when crowds meet. And there's always something going on. I always remember a particular time when I went to Brooklyn. And I went for Black Friday, which is a big sale time in America, and it was around my birthday time, so I went with a few of my friends. And I remember we planned to get up at like 4 in the morning to get down to this shop called Macy's. And we said, look, if we've got to get there early, because it's going to be crazy. There's going to be so many people there. There's going to be a massive crowd. And I remember getting there, and there was hundreds of people outside the store, because you can get things ridiculous, like $200 trainers for like $20, or a pair of Levi jeans for $10. It was ridiculous how cheap things were. And I remember people pushing and shoving to get into this shop. I'm sure some fists were thrown at times. Security were pushing people. And I remember I was there with my friends. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not saying I hit anyone or anything, but I did, sort of creep to get a bit further in the queue to actually get in the shop, because I wanted to be part and get something out of this sale. But one thing I had to do in the end, because it was just so crazy, I thought, you know what, Leon, you're in Brooklyn, you're from Leicester, I cherish my life, I don't want, I've got a few things illegal in America, so I thought, you know what, let's just be patient. But I was determined, no matter what, just to stand in that queue and just, get into the shop. And I must say, when I actually got in, I got more bargains than I actually thought. So I had to show a level of discipline and a level of determination and patience to actually get in. Now, the reason I've shared that today, just to paint a bit of a picture about what we're going to speak about today. And today we're going to look at what took place in Luke 8, verses 40 to 56. And in the NIV Bible, it's actually labeled, Jesus heals in response to faith. However, today's preach is actually going to be titled, The Girl and the Woman. Now, just to give a bit of a backstory before we read into this, crowds heard Jesus was coming, and because not long before, as Pastor Mary discussed last week, Jesus had just not long healed a demon-possessed man, which we spoke about last week. And after he healed the man, he told him to go back to his family and to tell what the great thing he has done in terms of healing him. Now, the news traveled like crazy. Now, can you imagine? Back then, there was no Instagram, Twitter, none of that Facebook business. It was all word of mouth, and that news traveled far and wide. So you can imagine that the crowd that were coming to see Jesus were in anticipation to see him, because they heard of the great things he's done. And in this section that we're going to read today, there's two key events that take place. One, a woman was suffering from bleeding, and two, a child was dying. And what we're going to do today is we're going to sort of break down the sequence of events that took place in Luke 8, 40 to 56. And I'm just going to share 4 things that I believe God was put on my heart today to share. And sometimes, I must admit, anyone that's preached before will sometimes feel you always feel nervous, but you sometimes think, it's just the right thing to bring. But the songs that we've sang, the individual words, everything that's been spoke about this morning, it ties in perfectly to what we're going to speak about today. So I know that God is definitely working in today and what we're about to talk about. So if we read in Luke 8, verses 40 to 44, and this is the NIV version, it reads, "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. So I call this first section the obstacle, aka the crowd. Now, in order for anyone to be able to get to Jesus, they would have had to push and shove and sort of do all sorts to try and get to him. And it reads that the crowd almost crushed him. So you can imagine the amount of people that were there. And it says, we all know the reason why Jesus and people were gathering, because they knew the great things that Jesus had done. But as I said, you can imagine how packed it was. And no matter who you are, getting through that crowd would not have been easy in any way, shape, or form. And as I was reading that, it reminded me of a time where myself, Aisha, Leah, and Jaron, we went to a concert. And halfway through, the person presenting said, the event's going to stop now. You'll remember, the event's going to stop now because there's been an incident in the back, so we need everyone to get out. So you can imagine the amount of people that were trying to rush and get out of this building. Mine and Jaron's first thought was, right, we need to get out of here and protect our wives. So I remember me and Jaron were next to each other. I was holding Aisha, he was holding Leah, and we were pushing through. We didn't have any other mindset of fear, just to get through that crowd and be determined to get back to our hotels. And we did it, but there was certain things going on in that crowd because people were obviously annoyed. There was people that were involved in incidents that were causing trouble, but we had to get through that. And it required a level of determination to actually be able to do that. Now, the woman, as I mentioned, she was bleeding for 12 years. She would have been in extremely weakened condition. So you can imagine her energy levels were really, really low. So to get through that crowd would require an extreme level of determination to get through that. The same way, if your child was dying or you needed to get help from someone, you're not going to see any obstacle. You're just going to push through and try and get as much help as possible. And as it says, it doesn't mention anywhere in the dialogue that the woman, and people made way for the woman or people made way for the leader. It doesn't mention that. It just says that they managed to get through to Jesus. Now, there may be some people here that have been going through some stuff. Some people here today may even have not given their life to Jesus because there's things in the way. There's things blocking them. The crowds around you are pushing you in the wrong directions, and it's hard to get through. But we read that the lady had been suffering for 12 years. That's an extremely long time to be suffering with bleeding of any form. Now, again, in the Bible, it doesn't say what she tried. It doesn't say what she tried. It just said that she tried everything and there was no cure. So that's 12 years of trying 12 different things, and I don't even know what other things she could have tried. There may be some people here today, again, that have been dealing with certain things, maybe not for 12 years, but for an extremely long time, and found no cure. But here today, what I'm here to tell you is that the cure is Jesus. And in order for you to get, in order to get to Jesus, you're going to have to push past all the obstacles, all the different things that are blocking you and trying to push you in another direction. And like I said, it requires a lot of determination. It would have been hard enough for a bleeding woman to even get out of bed, find the energy to even start walking to get through the crowd, but she's seen no obstacle. And I think that's what we need to do. One of the things we're going through, we need to see no obstacle and just reach out and use everything we have to reach out to Jesus. Don't let your surroundings obstruct you either, because, like I said, the crowd was crushing Jesus. So to push through that, you have to see past that and see Jesus only. Because if you don't, you're going to be pushed aside and taken in a completely different direction. You can't do any of this on your own strength. It does require a level of faith. And that leads me nicely into my second point, which is that Jesus notices you. Same chapter, Luke 8, in verses 45 to 46, it reads, "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone from me." So as we read before, the lady has got through the crowd and she's touched the hem of his garment. And Jesus is saying, of all the things that happened, you can imagine the amount of people crushing against Jesus, he noticed that one touch. And again, it doesn't say in the Bible, but it's as if the lady did it sort of secretly, because we know Jairus fell at the feet of Jesus asking for help, where she was sort of behind and sort of touched the hem of his garment. And it's like she crept up behind him to touch him. But Jesus knew that the bleeding woman had touched him, and he was happy to identify that person as well. And sometimes we can be a bit tentative to actually want to touch out to Jesus and not want to come face to face with him. It's a bit like, I can explain, a bit like Dre at times. Dre can be standing next to me, and someone's calling him to come, and then he screws his face up, as you've probably all seen, and he'll turn his back. But then the minute that person turns the other way or diverts their attention, he runs up to them a little bit. Then when they turn around, he runs back. And we can be a bit like that when it comes to even giving our lives to Jesus, asking for something, and having that sense of not being worthy, like we've spoke about it this morning, about not feeling worthy, or we feel that what we're asking God isn't right, or we're not good enough, or we feel unclean. And we can be scared to go into the unknown. Whilst the bleeding lady would have had the faith, there was some form of tentativeness because the way that she actually approached Jesus, and she tried to do it and just sort of walk away. But faith is not intended to be hidden, and that's why Jesus was so adamant to understand who it was, and also make the woman understand that she's not overlooked in any way, shape, or form. Now, God can do all things and wants us to come to him in faith, but what we need to do is make sure that we're open to receive that. And we all have different needs and different sort of things that are going on in our lives, but Jesus notices every single one of us, of our issues, and he understands us inside out. So if there's anyone here today feeling that they're not worthy, or someone else is more important than me, don't think that in any way, shape, or form, because Jesus, as we've sang, Jesus he would leave the 99 to find you, and God's love is for everyone. And there's no sort of category or hierarchy. God's love is for everyone, and he reaches out to all. My third point is that healing wasn't public, faith was. So again, in the same chapter, Luke 8, verses 47, it reads, as 47-48, then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Now, some may read this, and it's easy to assume that Jesus wanted everyone to know that he performed healing. Some may read it and assume that that moment was all about Jesus. But it wasn't. What it actually was, it was about the woman and her faith, because Jesus turns around and says to her, "Your faith has healed you." So again, the crowd had gathered for so many different reasons, and there would have been hundreds of people there for different aspects. But Jesus didn't want everyone to know about him. Jesus wanted everyone to know about her faith and how her faith had healed her. And that's why I've titled this section that healing wasn't the public main sort of theme. Faith was. You may be sitting here thinking, I'm not strong enough. You've been let down many, many times. You've lost people you've trusted. But there's a big difference here. And the difference is found in Matthew 17, verses 20. And it says, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." The size of a mustard seed is the size of the faith of the bleeding woman to heal everyone. Is the size of the mustard seed was the size of faith that the bleeding woman needed to be healed. Can you imagine the impact the words, "Your faith has healed you," had on the crowd? It would have spread just as fast as all the news of Jesus arriving. And see, when you demonstrate faith in your day-to-day lives, it can have an impact on others in a drastic way and actually bring more people to Jesus. And our faith needs to be public. It's not something that needs to be hidden. And as I was preparing this, it reminded me of a time when I started a new job within HSBC, and it did require you to be on the phones. And because I was a bit worried, I thought, you know what, I don't want to go on the phone. So every time I managed to, "Leon, you're on the phones today," and I was like, "No, it's all right, I'm going to do these emails," or, "Oh, my throat's hurting," I'd make up an excuse to not go on the phones. And then I remember one day, my manager, she took me in a room, and she just said to me, "Leon, look, you need to take a leap of faith, mate. Come on, you need to take a leap of faith." I was like, "Okay then." So I remember the next day, I went in, and then I jumped on the phones, and it was perfectly fine. There was no issues at all. And ever since that time, when I went on to manage a team, I always use that as an example. So if someone's struggling with something, I'd say, look, I remember when my manager said to me, look, just take a leap of faith. Come on, you can do it as well. But the key thing about that, it wasn't a case of me boasting about my ability. It was nothing to do with that. It was just trying to demonstrate what happens if you have faith. Now, that's in a day-to-day working environment. Imagine the impact we can have when we're talking about our Christian life to others and how that can impact people. That will have a bigger impact than me talking about my job. So we need to make sure we're demonstrating that in all our actions. And I believe in this situation, Jesus was showing everyone that healing was a minor. The actual healing part of it was a minor to God, but what he achieved in faith, what can be achieved in faith, is massive, and that's why we need to make sure our faith is public. And most importantly, in a world at the moment where people are standing for things that we as Christians don't stand for, if we don't stand up and show faith and demonstrate that, then there's going to be our kids that are going to be growing up in a world where they're going to believe everything. So we need to demonstrate our faith so that people can follow that, because we all individually have a responsibility. It's not Pastor Mary's responsibility because they're pastors. No, we all individually have a responsibility to impact all of our surroundings and the crowds that we are surrounded by. The next point is, I've called this section the delay. And it reads in verses 49 to 52, Luke 8 again. While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." So Jesus was identifying the person who touched the bleeding woman, and while that was going on, someone's come to him and said, "Jesus, what's going on? You're still speaking here, and now your daughter's dead. Why have you taken so long," sort of thing. It was a bit of a weird situation because no one could understand why it took so long, considering Jairus. When you think about it, Jairus was the first person to confront Jesus and fall at Jesus' feet. So you'd probably think, well, that should have been a bit of a priority. But Jesus was held up. And when I say held up, I don't mean in a way of, in a bad way. He was held up because he was dealing with a situation where he wanted to identify someone who declared faith. But what do we do in our day-to-day lives when we ask Jesus for something or we ask for healing and it doesn't happen straight away? How do we respond to that? What do we do when God does not come through in the time that we want? Because there's a phrase I've heard, things happen in God's time, not your time, and that's something sometimes it's hard to take. We want a new job tomorrow, but God might say, actually, you're going to wait 5 years. And what do you do in that situation? It also reads and says that when Jesus didn't arrive to Jairus on time, and because of that, they turned around and said, "She's dead." But what Jesus actually turned around in that situation and said, "She's not dead, but she's asleep." And how did the crowd respond to that? So Jesus just said, "Look, she's not dead, she's asleep, don't worry about it." The crowd then turned around and they started to laugh at him, knowing that she was dead. Now, in all our day-to-day situations and the things that we're going through, what do we do when the people around us either laugh at us when we say, "You're trusting God for something," or when you say, "I'm trusting God for healing," and the people are laughing at us? How do we respond to that? Do we still remain faithful and trust God that he's going to come through to us? Do we say to God, "You know what, God, don't bother, it's too late, my situation's got too bad now, it's gone too far down the line"? Do we still believe? Do we start wailing and mourning and think it's too late for God to come through? But if you're currently juggling an issue with illness, finance, your wife, daughter, whoever it may be hasn't given their life to Jesus, and you're seeing others be saved or others' life be impacted before you, don't wail. Don't give up. Rest assured that God's timing is perfect. And when you think your situation is at its worst and that there's no cure, that's when God steps in and he can do the impossible. Someone from the house of Jairus was saying to Jesus, Jesus, you're chatting away. Come on. Why? It's dead now. You should be here. And as I mentioned earlier, Jairus fell at the feet of Jesus. So you would have thought he would have been the first person that you deal with. But did Jesus need to really acknowledge the lady who touched him? When you think about it, not really. Did Jesus need to show faith was the key to her healing? Not really. Someone is dying, but Jesus was like, it's okay, don't worry, it's fine. I'm just going to address this person. And like I said, there was hundreds of people, but Jesus wanted to address that one little touch. And we can sometimes be like that in our situation. God, you're healing them. What about me? Or, God, you've saved that person. Why have you not saved my husband? Or, God, you've given them a husband and wife. Why have you not given me a husband and wife? Or whatever it may be. But whatever you're going through today, we need to remember that Jesus said, don't be afraid, just believe. And as I mentioned earlier about having faith the size of a mustard seed, if we have that, then God can do all that we could ever ask in a bigger way. And what we want from God is small in his eyes. But when we wait on him, he will give us more than we can even imagine. Jairus asked Jesus for his daughter to be healed. However, due to the delay, not by the woman, but by Jesus identifying something greater was witnessed. As an act of faith was witnessed because of the lady being healed after 12 years, and also a resurrection because the girl was actually declared dead, but Jesus actually resurrected her. So whilst we're asking for something small from Jesus, but he's picking up on something bigger. And we read further when it says in verses 54 to 56, but he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them to not tell anyone what happened. So in this situation, the greater the delay, the greater the victory. Again, Jairus asked for healing. He actually witnessed a resurrection. You may be asking God today to heal you, but you don't understand what the bigger picture is, because when you are healed, through that period of time, God may save all your family members because of what you've been going through. Some of you may ask God to support you with your finances. God may give you a new job, 3 kids and a wife. You don't know, because God's vision is so much bigger than our smaller views. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that what you want from God and what God has got planned for you is far bigger than you can imagine. But you have to have faith, and most importantly, you have to wait on him. God wishes to bless us in a greater way we can ask, because the greater the victory, the greater glory to God. Now, I mentioned earlier how the crowd, they pressed against Jesus, and he noticed one thing, the person that touched the hem of his garment. Every single person here, no matter who you are, God hears you when you call out to him. He hears your heart's cry. He doesn't want you to tap him on your shoulder or hide. He wants you to come before him and show that small bit of faith, because he wants to he wants you to bring your burden to him so that today he can deal with that for you. But you've got to remember, there will be obstacles. There will be people pushing against you and trying to push you in a different direction. You need to be determined to push through in your weakest state, just like that woman. Like I said, 12 years of bleeding, she would have had no strength, but she still managed to push through. Jesus will notice you in the crowd, no matter who you are, no matter how. You may say it's silly and it's not as big as someone else's problem. It is big in God's eyes. He will notice you. There's going to be a delay. Others may be blessed before you, but you have to trust God's perfect timing, because in the time you're saying, God, why are you not doing it now? You don't know what the bigger plan is. And it's amazing the great things that God has done. We touched on it in our life group the other day about how different people in our groups have been impacted by each other, and you wouldn't have imagined it. If someone didn't come to church on this particular day, then it wouldn't have impacted this person. And that's why we have to remember that there may be some of you saying, why is my partner or why is my family member not giving their heart to God? just trust his timing, because you don't know what he's doing in that delay. Some of you asking for healing, again, just be faithful. You don't know who you're having an impact on through that period of time. And you might look at the situation and think, well, it's a bit odd how a bleeding woman waiting for 12 years to be healed, and a child who's 12, who's asking for healing as well. It wasn't a coincidence that them two events took place in that particular crowd. It was God's timing, and it was an opportunity to show people what happens when you have faith. And what we need to remember is that there's no limit to God's power. There's no sort of, daily withdrawal limit or anything like that. It's not limited. Just because he's helped, he might help Matt today, doesn't mean he can't help me today. It doesn't work like that. He can have an impact on everyone. But and there's no, we have to wait in line. There's nothing about that. It's about just having faith and trusting God. And just to finish, I just want to say that whatever it is that you've asked God to do, whatever it is that's been delayed in your life, if God has promised it to you, it will be done. And God doesn't go back on his word. Your friends, family members, whoever it may be, can say one thing and do the opposite. But God will never fail you, because at the end of the day, the greater the delay, the greater the victory and the greater glory given to God. Thank you, everyone.